You cannot manage what you don't measure, and I've heard that a few times at various pig discussion group meetings in different places around the world. And I think when it comes to the weaner pig, I think this is sadly neglected. We all measure litter size because it's easy. We might measure days to bacon, and we might even measure food inputs. When it comes to things like weaning weight is a very important parameter because it determines everything else down the stream. And actually, if you get an 8 kilogram weaner or even an 8.5 kilogram weaner, everything else then goes like clockwork thereafter. You get a 70-day weight that actually hits 30 kilograms. You then get perhaps an age at slaughter that might even be as early as 142 to 150 days perhaps, and mortality levels that are quite low. So these basic parameters, I think, should really be measured by all progressive units, and including also the FCR, which in the nursery phase should be about 1.4 kilograms of food into 1 kilogram of body weight gain. But it's that weaning weight that's the most important thing that determines all these other things, and actually sadly it's not very often measured. And in fact this slide just shows the actual progression of the growth of the young pig from its early life when it starts off at about 1.2, 1.3 kilograms birth weight onto a weaning weight of 8 kilos, and then onto that 30 kilo weight, and then finally to 115 kilos slaughter. And the problem is that as the prolificity has risen lately in sows, maybe some guys are very easily getting 28, 29 piglets per sow per year, even 30. But of course it does tend to reduce the birth weights, makes it much more difficult to get to that 8 kilo target. And actually, of course, if we wean very early, as some herds still do at 21 days, then that makes life even more difficult to achieve that target. And you're sitting on probably 5.5 to 6 kilo weaners that will then, post-weaning, be very, very difficult to rear, as I'll try and outline. Okay, now this is a point on this slide here actually that I would just like to make here, that starter feeds, the sort of very expensive inputs that they are in terms of price per ton, are actually a very small proportion of overall feed inputs. And I think we should always keep this in mind, that 3 to 4 to 5% of feed inputs for the whole slaughter pig is expensive per ton, but it's quite cheap basically per piglet. But the point to make actually on the bottom of that slide is that 3% of feed inputs determines 30% of the variations in growth to slaughter. So if you make a mess or you have poor feed inputs at the beginning, you're likely to lose as much as 30% of your growth. On the other hand, if you can make good quality feeds and put the investment into those diets, then you're likely to gain growth because of that. So it was an important point to keep in mind. And in fact this slide just shows the reason for that, well known in the pig action. It was often, some people used to argue with that, but I don't hear many people arguing about this point nowadays. There is no compensatory growth in young piglets, and when they lose growth in that early part of the growth curve, they actually have difficulty or impossible to regain back onto that red line. The red line here is the genetic potential of the modern pig. So if we see a growth dip, or you have a poor quality diet regime in that first few weeks of life, the piglets are likely on that green line and will hit slaughter maybe as late as 20 days after the full genetic potential. So that early phase of life is extremely important in the whole growth phase.